Hello and welcome to this Ask Reddit video. In this episode, what's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? Most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you. The 24 hours before my dad died, stage 4 lung cancer, he was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital COVID rules. My mother, sister, and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes, and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule his body for pickup at the hospital, and going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us. His phone was in there, and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone, and all our texts had not been read, not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad has been chatting with this girl hourly for the last 24 hours and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on. Why was he in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having, at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her via DMS. And found out she was 19 years old. She was 17 when they met. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he died and dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a shitty secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad, with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? I don't know how disturbing this is. It turned out pretty fantastic for one. But not for another. I was adopted and told a silly magical story about my birth parents that most certainly did not seem true even when I was a child. At 57, I learned I was the result of a college affair between a very seriously Jewish young man and a very Baptist young woman. She was rushed off to a home for wayward girls to give birth. He followed her there, many states away, begging her to keep me and live a life together. But their families both said absolutely not. Jewish people were not viewed as white in the mid-60s, and her family most certainly did not want her marrying a non-white. Plus, she was a very committed Christian and did not want to convert to Judaism. So off I went, into another family. I recently discovered 3 lovely half-siblings, and we are all pro or semi-pro musicians and get along well. I never got to meet my mother. She died a year before I searched. My father is out of the picture and wants to be left alone, and I'm fine with that. I'm grateful for the love he gave me. It was enough. Another person that was in my non-bio family was also adopted. She was older than me. She tracked down her mom later in life too. She was in a hospital and had been since the day she was born. She was born holistically disabled. Physical, mental, cognitive, learning, sensory, and was raped by an orderly, and she discovered she was the result. Endings to our searching are not always happy. What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? She was my best friend of 7 years. We had literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her, after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said screw it, let's go back, she's basically family. We were all so happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a blast. Best year of my life. Then slowly, she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her, and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her infertility issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a sperm donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sperm and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, banging on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I had never had a friend like her, only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, BTW. What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? I found out when I was an adult that my mother didn't just abandon me one day after work like I had been led to believe. Turns out she had been gang raped. She said they took her wallet and made a disgusting comment about my picture inside. I would have been a toddler at this time, and she was just too scared to go home. She said they followed her. She said when it was over and my stepdad took her to the hospital, they had to stitch everything back together down there. She spent that time away on and off the psych ward. My mom and me still have a rocky relationship for reasons beyond this, but I definitely understand her better. She's had issues with drinking and her mental health all my life, and I really think it's because she's never sought proper help for what happened to her. Underneath all that trauma, drinking, and grief is my mother, and she's one of the most beautiful souls that'll ever walk this earth. For clarification, she stayed in my life, just my grandparents raised me. There was a lot of other drama as well, but none of it worth getting into.